Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for gathering together to immerse ourselves in this moment of Torah. We are in Parshat Tazria, which is in the book of Leviticus at the very start of chapter 12. And if anyone would like to go on unmute, together we can recite our blessing for the wonderful opportunity of sharing this moment together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu
mitzvotav
v'tzivanu la'asot divrei
Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Parshat Tazria, chapter 12 of the book of Leviticus, beginning with verse 1. We'll read through our English translation, then I'll share with you a little bit of focused study on the portion, and then we'll open it up for our collective collaborative conversation about it. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be unclean 7 days. She shall be unclean as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. If she bears a female, she shall be unclean 2 weeks as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days. Dave Leb, would you like to read a little bit there, beginning at verse 6?
On the completion of her period of purification for either a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He shall offer it before Adonai and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be pure from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child, male or female. If, however, her means do not suffice for a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The priest shall make expiation on her behalf, and she shall be pure.
Thank you so much, Dave. June, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 13?
Fine. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, when a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising, or a scab, or a bright spot, and it become in the skin of his flesh the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priests. And the priest shall look on the plague in the skin of the flesh, and if the hair in the plague be turned white, and the appearance of the plague be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is the plague of leprosy. And the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. And if the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh, and the appearance thereof be not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, then the priest shall shut up him that hath the plague 7 days. And the priest shall look on him the 7th day, and behold, if the plague stay in its appearance, and the plague be not spread in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days more. And the priest shall look on him again the 7th day, and behold, if the plague be dim, and the plague be not spread in the skin, then the priest shall proclaim him clean. It is a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spread abroad in the skin, after that he hath shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall show himself to the priest again. And the priest shall look, and behold, If the scab be spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy.
Thank you so much, Jean. And Mark Thompson, would you like to read a little bit following?
Verse 9, correct?
Yes.
When a person has a scaly affection, it shall be reported to the priest. If the priest finds on the skin a white swelling, which has turned some hair white, with a patch of undiscolored flesh in the swelling, it is chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He need not isolate him, for he is unclean. If the eruption spreads out over the skin, so that it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, wherever the priest can see, if the priest sees that the eruption has covered the whole body, he shall pronounce the affected person clean. He is clean, for he has turned all white. But as soon as undiscolored flesh appears in it, he shall be unclean. When the priest sees the undiscolored flesh, he shall pronounce it unclean. The undiscolored flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. But if the undiscolored flesh again turns white, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. If the affection has turned white, and the priest shall pronounce the affected person clean, he is clean. When an inflammation appears on the
Thank
skin.
you so much, Mark.
Yeah.
Let me invite Robert, if you'd like to continue there at verse 18. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. The flesh also, in which even in the skin thereof was a boil and is healed, and in the place of this boil there be a white rising or a bright spot, white and somewhat reddish, and it be showed to the priest. And if when the priest seeth it, behold, it be in sight lower than the skin, and the hair thereof be turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy broken out of the boil. But if the priest look on it, and behold, there be no white hairs therein, and if it be not lower than the skin, but be somewhat dark, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And if he spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if the bright spots stay in his place and spread not, it is a burning boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean.
Thank you so much, Robert. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to read a little bit there at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. When the skin of one's body sustains a burn by fire, and the patch from the burn is a discoloration, either white streaked with red or white, the priest shall examine it. If some hair has turned white in the discoloration, which itself appears to go deeper than the skin, it is leprosy that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous affection. But if the priest finds that there is no white hair in the discoloration, and that it is not lower than the rest of the skin, and it is faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him. If it has spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous affection. But if the discoloration has remained stationary, not having spread on the skin, and it is faded, it is the swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn.
Thank you so much, Jim. Let me invite David and Susan. Would you like to read starting at verse 29?
Yes, thank you. And should again, is that,
And well,
am I unmuted?
yes, you're unmuted, and we're on verse 29, and my words are different from your words. So
And should a man or a woman have an affliction in head or beard, and the priest see the affliction and look, it seems deeper than the skin, and there is thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall declare him unclean. It is scurf. It is blanched disease of the head or of the beard. And should the priest see the affliction and look, it does not seem deeper than the skin, but it has no black hair, the priest shall confine the person with the affliction of scurf another 7 days. And the priest shall see the affliction on the 7th day, and look, if the scurf has not spread and there is no yellow hair in it, and the scurf seems deeper than the skin, the person with the scurf shall shave himself, but the scurf he shall not shave. And the priest shall confine the person with the scurf another 7 days.
And the priest shall see the scurf on the 7th day. And here the scurf is not spread in the skin, and its appearance is not deeper than the skin, then the priest shall identify him as pure or clean. And he shall wash his clothes, and he shall be clean. But if the scurf has spread in the skin after his purification, and the priest will see him, and lo, the scab has spread in the skin, the priest shall not inspect for the yellow hair. He is impure. And if in his eyes the scurf has stayed the same, and the black hair has developed in it, the scurf has been healed. He is clean, and the priest shall identify him as clean.
Thank you so much, both David and Susan. And Stephen, Sherry, are you available? Would you like to read a little bit?
We're still leading. Could I just go ahead and pass this time? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Enjoy your meal of all
Thank you.
kinds.
Yeah,
Paul, would you like to read there? I think we're at verse 38.
thank you, Rabbi. If a man or woman has spots in the skin of their flesh, white spots, the Cohen shall look and
I just
behold.
came downstairs because I wanted to see if it was still thundery, stormy, and so we had a.
Okay.
Okay, on the skin of their flesh are dim white spots. It is a bohack that has erupted on the skin. It is pure. If the hair of a man's head falls out, he is bald at the back of his head, he is pure. And if his hair falls out toward the front of his head, he is frontally bald, he is pure. And if in the posterior or frontal baldness, there should be a white affliction streaked with red, it is an eruption of saras on his posterior or frontal baldness. The Cohen shall look at it, and behold, there is a sase affliction. That is a white streaked with red in the posterior or frontal baldness, like the appearance of saras on the skin of the flesh. He is a person with saras. He is contaminated. The Cohen shall declare him contaminated. His affliction is upon his head.
Thank you so much, Paul. Gary, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 45?
As the person with a leprous affliction, the clothes shall be rent, the head shall be left bare, and the upper lip shall be covered over, and that person shall call out, impure, impure. The person shall be impure as long as the disease is present. Being impure, that person shall dwell apart in a dwelling outside the camp. When an eruptive affliction occurs in a cloth of wool or linen fabric, in the wrap or in the woof of the linen, or the wool, or in a skin, or in anything made of skin. If the affliction in the cloth of the skin, in the wrap or the woof, in any article of skin is streaky, green, or red, it is an eruptive affliction. It shall be shown to the priest. And the priest, after examining the affection, shall isolate the affected article for 7 days. On the 7th day, he shall examine the affection. If the affection has spread in the cloth, whether in the wrap or the woof or in the skin, for whatever purpose the skin may be used, the affection is a malignant eruption. It is impure. The cloth, whether wrap or woof, in a malignant eruption, it shall be consumed in fire. But if the priest sees that the affection in the cloth, whether in warp or in woof or in any article of skin, has not spread, the priest shall order the afflicted article washed, and he shall isolate it for another 7 days. And if after the affected article has been washed, the priest sees that the affliction has not changed color, and that it has not spread, it is impure. It shall be consumed in fire. It is a fret, whether on its inner side or on its outer side. But if the priest sees that the affected part, after it has been washed, is faded, he shall tear it out from the cloth or skin, whether in a warp or in the woof. And if it occurs again in the cloth, whether in the warp or the woof, or in any article of skin, it is a wild growth. The affected article shall be consumed in fire. If, however, the affection disappears from the cloth, warp or woof, or from any article of skin that has been washed, it shall be washed again, and it shall be pure.
And Gary,
Such-
why don't you just read the last?
Sure.
Yeah.
Such is the procedure for eruptive afflictions of cloth, woolen, or linen, in warp or in wool, or any article of skin, for pronouncing it pure or impure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That is our Torah portion for this week. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out. At the very top of the study sheet is a painting by the artist Osnat Sodak. And we've actually met this artist, Osnat Sodak, just a couple of weeks ago. She is a woman who was born in Israel, now lives in Canada. And 2 weeks ago, we had her painting entitled The Fire Within. That was part of our study of Parshat Tzav. And if you remember, part of the discussion there had to do with the description that there are 2 fires that are to be maintained within the Mishkan. And one of the fires is deep inside the Holy of Holies, and the other fire is in the outer courtyard of the Mishkan. And that outer one is the one that the Torah text says is to be continuously burning. So we looked at a little bit about what does that mean to have a fire continually burning, and what does it mean that it's on the altar that's on the outside part of the Mishkan. And her painting helped, I think, enhance our sense of this, of that continuous burning that our sages talk about is the way that we are supposed to present ourselves to the world in terms of a holy fire that's always burning, and our sense of gratitude both for being alive and our gratitude for encountering others in this world. So this week we have another painting by her, and this one is called Abundance. And I think what we'll do here is you'll see that we have some very clearly identified objects, unlike her previous painting, which was a little bit more abstract. This one, you can see several objects that we can identify. And what I'd like to do is go back to this painting towards the end of our focus study session and delve into it a little bit more deeply. But I do invite you to kind of look at her painting over the course of our reviewing this week's Torah portion to see what you observe there, what grabs your attention. And I will tell you that just as a way of opening up a little bit the discussion, although she presents here several clearly identifiable objects, for me, they described a deeper message that has to do not so much with what we see on the outside, but a deeper message that has to do with the inside. And I'd like to suggest that that's what's happening in this week's Torah portion. It's describing things, as we're reading it, they sound strange, but they also sound like things that they deal with things that we recognize, having to do with people's bodies, their hair, their skin, certain skin conditions. These are things that we can recognize, even though the particularities of these conditions may seem unfamiliar to us, and that certainly the treatment of them may seem unfamiliar to us. Well, I think we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into seeing what else might be going on here, just as we'll later look at the painting to see what may be going on inside her painting other than what we're seeing right on the surface. So to get into the Torah portion, I'd like to take a step back from the details of what we've just read and just again place the book of Leviticus in some kind of a broader context. A lot of times over the past several years when I've studied the book of Leviticus, I've thought about it in different ways. And this year, I've looked at it very differently than I have in the past. And it has to do with this, that we've just emerged out of the book of Exodus, which is this broad historical sweep of what's happening to an entire nation. We've been looking at it with, I think, sensitivity, modern sensitivity of people who are enslaved, of a people who are battling a tyrannical, mighty empire. You know, we can begin to read perhaps some common day and modern day replications of that. So that may come to mind. But so we are in the book of Exodus with history happening and an entire people and two nations who seem to be in conflict with one another. And what I'd like to suggest is that what's happening with the book of Leviticus, it is almost as if the book of Leviticus has this, the Torah itself has this awareness that the march from slavery to freedom, to a land of promise, where people are going to now be free to create their own nation, to set up their own rules, to live as a sovereign people. It's almost as if Torah has this recognition, oh, the journey isn't that easy. And it's not easy for a people who have been enslaved for hundreds of years to all of a sudden become self-reliant and independent and capable of running their own nation. So I want to suggest that what's happening in the book of Leviticus is it is an attempt by Torah to take a step back and realize we're dealing with imperfect people here. We're dealing with people who have experienced trauma. We're dealing with people who haven't had the opportunity to be sovereign in their own personal lives, much less to have a sense of sovereignty as a nation. And so what I, as Torah, need to do is to begin to introduce to each one of the people who are on this march some kind of practice that will enable them to transition from the trauma, from the sovereign impoverishment, from the constraints on their sovereign selves, to take them from that to a place where they can be the kind of people that can be individual sovereign and then sovereign as a nation. So I want to suggest that what's happening in the book of Leviticus is it's setting up some kind of protocols and practices that will help people make that transition. And so I want to suggest that the book of Leviticus is indeed a very personal, as opposed to a historic, it's a very personal book. And what fascinates me is a single word in this week's Torah portion. And a single word in this week's Torah portion set up for me a bit of an associative journey to a lot of other concepts that I want to just share with you. And then we can either discuss that, or we can discuss, of course, whatever you encountered along the way of reading this week's Torah portion. So the single word that caught my attention is actually the word that gives this week's Torah portion its name, which is Tazria. And so in our Torah portion, at the very beginning, we have this phrase, Isha ki Tazria. Tazria is the name of our Torah portion. And I've got a couple of different translations here, and they render that word Tazria a little differently. My Jewish Publication Society translation says, when a woman at childbirth bears a male child, and then goes on. And then I also have an Art Scroll translation, which renders the word Tazria as when a woman conceives and gives birth to a male child. So the word Tazria, as we have on our study sheet, comes from the Hebrew verb zara, which means to sow or scatter seed. And we have the verb zera, which means a seed or sowing or an offspring. So perhaps a more literal translation of this word Tazria would be something along the lines of when a woman brings forth seeds, which is the name of this week's study sheet. When a woman brings forth seeds. So here we start off this week's Torah portion with this notion of a woman giving birth, and the word that's used for giving birth is this word having to do with the bringing forth of seeds. This brought to mind something that I realized, one of the 6 orders of the great early rabbinic work, the Mishnah, is called Zerayim, which means seeds. And on your study sheet, I list for you the individual volumes or tractates that are in that first order of the Mishnah. So they cover things such as seeds, blessings, corner of the field, the doubtfully tithed produce, mixtures having to do with mixing different agricultural products, the sabbatical year, teruma, which is the priest's portion of a harvest, a second tithe, challah, which is the dough that one is to offer up, orlah, which is fruit of the trees of the first 3 years, and first fruits. So as you see, everything in there except one item has to do with matters of agriculture. And then interestingly enough, included in this order dealing with matters of agriculture is the tractate Brachot, blessings. And it seems to me that agriculture is so fundamental to one's existence, one's life, one's survival, that it makes sense to include in this first order some guidance and some discussion about the nature of blessings, because we're so thankful to be alive. We're thankful to have food that sustains us. And of course, there are many other aspects of life that blessings deals with. So this is how the word Tazria set me off on thinking about seeds, Mishnah, agriculture, how important agriculture is, that it's the first topic, if you will, that the Mishnah deals with, and included in that is a sense of blessings. So then I realized we're talking about life, we're talking about birth, we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about blessings. And so I went back to the story of creation, which is where everything starts, where all of life begins. When I looked at the story of the Garden of Eden, I realized, the name of the woman, which is often translated in English as Eve, in Hebrew, the name is Chava. Chava which comes from the Hebrew verb for life. And so here in chapter 3, verse 20 of the book of Genesis, we have her name is Chava because she is the mother of all life. This is where everything starts from. And what's interesting is, well, there was another human that was involved here in the Garden of Eden, Adam. But unlike Chava, Adam is not referred to as being the progenitor of all life. It's just the woman. So there's some interesting recognition here about Chava, the female, as being the bearer of all life. She is the one to whom we express gratitude. Okay, so here so far in our little associative journey, we've moved from the very beginning of the book of Tazria into a discussion about the bringing forth of seeds. We recognize the Mishnah. The rabbis thought seed is such an important part of life. We're going to make it the first bit of discussion having to do with all the rules and regulations dealing with agriculture. We're also going to discuss blessings, because as soon as you start talking about what sustains us, you should also understand how to give thanks for what sustains us. Okay, and the notion about Chava as the source of all human existence. If you turn over the sheet, we do have a reference elsewhere in Scripture about the role of the man and the role of the woman, which is in the book of Proverbs, and that's what you see here listed as number 5 on the study sheet. And Proverbs 1:8 says, "Heed, my son, the musar of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother." So musar is a sense of discipline, particularly having to do with one's moral character. So that function, if you will, seems to be associated, at least in this verse from Proverbs, with the father. What's associated with the mother is the word Torah. Torah, which can be thought of in many ways, but Torah is wisdom, it's guidance, it's kind of an ongoing bit of interpretive body of wisdom. And Torah is really what brings everything into existence. Torah is sometimes thought of as, an expression of the blueprint of all of existence. Okay, so then if you look at number 4, what's listed as number 4 on your sheet is an excerpt from an interesting article by a woman named Sarah Esther Crispy, who is co-director of a very interesting Jewish website called Inter-Inclusion. I encourage you to look at it. And she's also dealing with this notion about what does it mean to be generative? What does it mean to procreate? What does it mean to be a bearer of life? She says this: it's not merely the idea of physical birth. The concept of being a mother is being creative, birthing new realities into this world. So now we're getting to this notion about when we're talking about bearing of seeds, we're not just talking about physical birth from out of the womb of the mother. Now we're expanding that notion of carrying seeds to also being a much more expansively creative notion, having to do with, as she puts it, birthing new realities into this world. Okay, so I'm playing with all these notions about generativity, procreation, and I start thinking about fertility, and I start thinking about one of the iconic images in Judaism and in other cultures as well about fertility, and that is the pomegranate. Okay. So many cultures, including Judaism, have the image of the pomegranate having to do with fertility, okay? And we have that sense of the sensuous aspect of the pomegranate appears in the Song of Songs. Your lips are like crimson thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your brow behind your veil gleams like a pomegranate split open. So of course, the Song of Songs, which we'll be reading very soon around Passover, is a poem dealing with a sensuous aspect of life, the two lovers infatuated with one another, pursuing one another. And the rabbis describe this as a sense of being in early stages of young adulthood just being infatuated, and many of the verses here are just border on, or actually are in the nature very erotic. And there was actually some controversy among the rabbis whether to include the Song of Songs because of how erotic it was. And then we have this another notion about pomegranates, which is in our tractate Brachot, which we encountered in our Mishnah of Zerayim. And it says this: even the empty ones among Israel are full of mitzvot, like a pomegranate is full of seeds. So here in Brachot, we have this iconic symbol of fertility. The pomegranate is now being associated with mitzvot, which the seeds, if you will, of Torah that we perform to help us stay focused and pursuing a healthy, whole, and holy life. So we're now Tazria, birth, giving forth seeds that could also remind us of agriculture, seeds that also remind us of creativity in general, and now specifically having to do with the seeds of life, having to do with the rules that help us live a life of holiness. And then I was thinking about pomegranates, and I realized, there's another mention of pomegranates, and that's in the book of Exodus, and that's number 8 on your sheet. You shall make the robe of the ephod of pure blue. On its hem make pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns all around the hem, with bells of gold between them all around. Now I have a verse that mentions pomegranates. It has to do with what the high priest wears. And in addition to pomegranates, at the bottom of his hem, we have bells of gold. I started thinking about gold. So now, if you turn back to our painting, what intrigued me about this painting called Abundance, not only does it have in it images of harvests, various kinds of harvests that connote the notion of abundance, but there, slightly left of center, is the pomegranate, which is also a source of all these seeds, which you can actually see the pomegranate there has been split open, and you can see some of the seeds there. And what intrigued me is that her entire painting is in gold. And I thought, why gold? What does gold have to do with her notion of abundance and what is being displayed on this painting? So I thought about gold. And gold is a fascinating color, especially within the context of Torah. Gold is mentioned, I think, at least about 50 times in Torah. It is mentioned exceptionally in Parshat Truma and Parshat Tetzaveh, which describes the making of the Mishkan and the making of the garments that the high priest will wear. And gold covers much of what the Mishkan consists of. It covers the ark, it covers the cherubim, it covers the altar, it covers the table for the showbread, and it is included in much of the high priest's garments, including chains and bells and rings and settings for stones and the headpiece that the high priest wears. So I thought gold denotes richness. It denotes royalty. Denotes an elevated status. And as I thought that, I thought, wait a minute, there's another place where gold is also plays a prominent part. And that's the golden calf. Ah, so we've got these two very different displays of gold. One having to do with the greatest downfall of the Israelite people on their way, this worshiping of an idol. And gold also plays a part in the perhaps most uplifting part, which is the building of the Mishkan, which was to be the instrument that we unite in continual communion of the people of Israel and God. So it is both, gold represents both a failure and an elevation. So there are several different metals that are used in the building of the Mishkan, gold, silver, and copper. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson says something very interesting about gold in particular. He says, he identifies gold with a sense of return to a path of holiness, that it's representative of having endured tests and hardships and of achieving a refinement of character as a result. So the notion that on the one hand, gold is indicative of the fall of the Israelite people, of their collapse, their moment of collapse, the golden calf. It can also represent their moment of elevation, their dedication to contributing to the building of the Mishkan. And I think what's important to recognize is that in both cases, this gold, in both the golden calf and the Mishkan, the people are voluntarily contributing something of themselves. They contributed something of themselves when they had this moment of failure, and then they have this moment of achievement when they contribute something of themselves. And Rabbi Schneerson says, gold can represent this moment of having experienced the lowest point in your life and then having risen above that moment and rededicating yourself to a path of refinement. So here's one more association that this whole journey took me on. I just want to share with you. Again, I went back to the beginning of everything, the story of creation. And I don't know why I turned to this, and I don't know why I never noticed this before, but in chapter 2 of the book of Genesis is one of the most important verses in all of Jewish mysticism. And it goes like this. This is talking about the story of the Garden of Eden. A river issues from Eden to water the garden, and it then divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that winds through the whole land of Havilah, where the gold is. The gold of that land is good. This river that issues from Eden in Kabbalah conveys this notion of the ongoing effluence of the divine into this world. And it fascinates me that the first branch of this goes to someplace, not only where there's gold, but the gold is good. It offers itself up to us, if you will, to use that wisely. So here's where we are. Here's at least what I saw as I read this week's Torah portion. I saw a collage on a canvas. And this collage consisted of images having to do with human generativity and nature's generativity. They're images having to do with a system of blessings in which we give thanks for both. There were images having to do with the spark of the creation of the whole world and its ongoing radiating power. And I appreciated both an artist's choice of color to remind us of our ability to choose and to return wiser when we've chosen inappropriately, and of a wise rabbi's words. So with that, I'd love to hear what you saw, what you experienced on our journey this evening. Please, if you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call it. Yeah. Yes, Paul, go ahead and unmute and share with us.
What I see in this painting is there really like four different levels. And the first level is it's the biggest portion is the finished product. It's the you're enjoying the beauty of the flowers and the details on the glass and so forth. So that's the upper level. And then you go down the next level, and that's actually like you look on a farm, and you see all these things growing out with seeds attached, and that's the second level down. And then, of course, the stuff that's hanging onto those individual, wreaths are the seeds, and then you can see those three guys in the corner. And then finally, the fourth level is actually, I know you have the interpretation of the pomegranate, but on the other hand, I just see that as you're looking inside the seed and you're seeing all the details. So it's the next level down. And so I see this as four levels of, and the total is abundance.
Well, that's fascinating, Paul. You could play a little bit further with the notion that in Kabbalah, there's this notion of 4 worlds, 4 dimensions. And so that's so lovely that you bring that element into it. I love what you see there, Paul. Thank you so much. I'm enriched by it. Let me call Sherry and Steve. You have your hand up, and then we'll move over to Catherine.
Just a couple things. One is that there's a wine glass and it looks like a bouquet of flowers. And I'm thinking, well, the wine comes from grapes, and grapes have seeds. And then the flowers, of course, have seeds. I was thinking about that, but also the elements of gold. I sort of grew up in the jewelry business. My father had a little jewelry store above a bank, and people would come in with their jewelry and have him appraise it and look at the gold, and he would look at the gold and he would say that this is 10 karat or 14 karat or 24, whatever it was. And so this just sort of brought me back to my summers, working in the store, and just different things that about gold that's for real and gold that isn't. And one of the things that would happen almost on a fairly regular basis is that that women would come in and they would want to hawk their wedding ring because they were getting a divorce or whatever. And the number of times that my father would look at this and he would say, honey, I'm sorry, but this just really isn't gold. And but he said it was this. He said it was 14 karat gold. And he said, I'm sorry, it's really, it's junk jewelry. I'm sorry to tell you that. So it just brought me down to that memory.
Wow, thank you so much. That's so rich to have you take us into that moment in your life, and how fascinating for your father to have been in that business and to have seen people both in their difficult straits, and then also to be able to provide them something that would bring them some happiness and joy and celebration. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Catherine, please unmute and share with us, and then we'll get to
Yes. When I looked at this painting, what immediately caught my eye was not just the pomegranate, but the fact that the pomegranate is surrounded by darkness. And it's sort of suspended in darkness. And so I think it belongs to a different temporality. I believe that it's sort of holding promise. In other words, you can see the seeds inside, but it's somehow held apart from the rest of the scene. So I just thought it's a pomegranate of promise.
Pomegranate of promise. Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. And let me call on Wendy, and then we'll get to David and Susan, and then Robert.
That's perfect, Catherine, because that's kind of what I see too. but I'm thinking about when you present something to a small child, even an adult, and I'm sure your father can attest to that. If there's gold and then there's something else, the little one goes for the bright gold. It's overwhelming. It takes precedence over everything. They want it, but since that pomegranate is set back in that darkness, I'm thinking gold can be brought to bad. But if we will hang on to that musar of our father and the Torah of our mother, then we will be above that happening, even though gold's still a great part of life and it's very beautiful. But I was just thinking of it as a warning kind of thing. And that's kind of dark for that, but I mean, abundance, and you're thinking, oh, abundance, but then wait, just think about how you use things and use things for the good instead of overdoing it.
But Wendy, I'm seeing something I hadn't seen before. So I want to thank both you and Catherine so much, because now I'm seeing the bursting forth, the expansiveness of the pomegranate now being somewhat framed and perhaps contained and defined. And then you brought up the Musar, the father, which is the sense of discipline and rigor, and then the Torah, which is this explosive, generative sense. So how fascinating that you brought that together. Thank you so much. David and Susan, and then we'll get to Robert and then June. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is one that has to do with the study sheet, which is item 6. Even the empty ones among Israel are full of mitzvot.
Yeah.
What did the rabbi? That's from Brachot. What are the rabbis referring to? What are they alluding to when they say the empty ones? I'm
Very
just
good.
afraid
Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think.
Well, it could be stupid people. It could be little babies. It could be people that have no spirituality. But I have a suspicion the rabbis were thinking of something else.
I think what in that context, what they're addressing are people who may be, if you will, halakhically unskilled, or who may not know all the rules, who may not have achieved a certain level of religious practice skill. Even they, he said, even they, this would be saying, full of all these mitzvot. And in other words, they have this capacity, and they should not be written off. And all it requires is some way in which to nurture that and to bring it out. That's what the context in which I see. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. So what the rabbis call the Am Haaretz.
I think that's actually the phrase that's used there. Yeah.
Oh, it is.
I think so.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. My other question is, and it's probably a derailment, but this entire Torah portion is about treating skin afflictions, clothing, the surfaces of walls, etc. And of course, it's interesting to think about why it all has to do with, or nearly all has to do with surfaces, or in the case of houses, the inside surfaces. But the question every year to me is, why this and not something else? Or why this and other things aren't covered? And that's just a question that it grabs me every year.
I'm so appreciative of the fact that you use the word surfaces. You know, skin, right, is our surface. It's something we can easily see. And what much of the rabbinic tradition says about all this material is it's not really a medical condition that we're dealing with. It's a spiritual condition that somehow manifests itself on the surface. And so now we're getting to kind of one of the sub themes of what we've been talking about, including with the painting, which is to pay attention not just to what's on the surface, but to explore what's happening under the surface. And that's what the rabbinic tradition wants us to do, is to not just look at this as a medical manual, but to look upon it as something to explore what's happening deep within inside the person's spiritual being that would cause some kind of disruption of the surface self. Okay. Anything, Susan, did you want to offer or say something?
Well, I wasn't going to, but I was just recently reminded of the Midrash about Pharaoh being told by his advisors that there was going to be somebody that was going to take his place, and his crown, apparently his gold crown, fell down, and there was Moses starting to go towards it, and then because he was attracted to the gold, and somehow,
Like Wendy said, I think.
yeah, and then an angel put a piece of coal and that attracted his attention, and he went over to it and burned his hands and maybe burned his tongue. And that, it's another gold story.
Isn't this rich? Isn't this rich for the way we're going with a chapter, a portion that could have gone in so many different directions? I think it's so rich what everyone's bringing to it. Thank you. Let me invite Robert, then June, then Dave, then Richard. Okay, and Mark. Okay, Robert.
Who would have thought that this tiny little Torah portion of this obscure and vaguely disgusting topics is stimulating this kind of response? Result of.
Thank you, Robert.
Again, thank you again. Such a stimulating evening. It's interesting. I looked at this artist's work after we had that session, and I have to tell you, I just love the passion she puts. I mean, it's just as exquisite. It's interesting. What stands out to me as I keep looking this, it's beautiful, but what I see is the wine cup. And if you look at it, especially the top, it's not perfectly formed. It shows the fragility of it. And what it reminds me of is the fragility of the human condition. Now, if you look at the base is much more symmetrical, and the stem is much more symmetrical. It's the foundation of life, the spiritual teachings, everything we need, and the experiences in the stem, if you will. But then the wine cup, volition, and what we do. What I really wanted to say, and I hope this is a compliment to what you said, E-M-E-N-T. I think it's very easy to look at these writings in the Torah that are, I understand, 3,500 years old, and to look at them with the eye of today. But as I look at what Moses revealed, yes, it has spiritual import, it must, but there was also the ephemeral, the material necessary for those people to continue. Moses never said, look, pigs have trichinosis. You have to, cook pork in an oven, 20 minutes at 140 degrees. So you kill the trichinosis. He just said, don't eat. And he did it with those other things. As I look at that, I think that was amazing guidance. And what we read tonight, I would say, is in a way technology, because it was medicine for that time. Granted, we can look at it, the spiritual aspect, but I don't overlook what Moses brought to those people at a time for their survival, when we didn't have the science and the mathematics and the understanding that we have today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think he did, an amazing thing. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I want to get to some other people as well. That's so rich to remind us of the wisdom that as a leader Moses brought to all this, and kind of as a challenge to ourselves to rise to the same level of helpful leadership. And so they call on June 1st. Go ahead, June.
Thank you. I want to build on what Paul said as well as Catherine. I see a lot layers here. The bright light in the back, I see almost as the burning bush with Adonai putting his light forth. And on the side, on the left, I see bricks and mortar. No one mentioned that. And those three in-betweens look like mortar to me and bricks from where they have come. And now they're moving forward. And the pomegranates that are on the ground seem kind of old, whereas the one in the block or the black seems more alive with the seeds, as was said before. To me, it almost looked like an earring, the way it's dangling there. So there's so many layers here, so much richness. So abundance, richness, life, it's all included, but I see it as layers and maybe as a moving forward.
Well, June, you helped me to see so many things that I hadn't seen before. The idea of a burning bush on the right and mortar and bricks on the left, a greater sense of the combustion on the right and the firmness, concretization on the left. That I hadn't seen that. Thank you so much. So instructive. Let me invite Dave Leb.
Okay. I'm surprised no one has said anything yet, but right in the foreground, closest to the, I'll say reader, that's a glass of beer right in the front, isn't it? A glass of beer,
There we
a
go.
foamy head on it.
That's
Go
fascinating.
get yourself a brew and enjoy the painting.
Okay. All right. And you can avoid being responsible for any pun having to do with Hebrews. So we'll just.
Bad.
All right. And so let me invite Richard. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Dave.
A couple of things. I'll try to be quick, but I noticed the fire under the black, and that's the coal guarding the gold of the pomegranate. There's two things going on, and within the pomegranate, I'm reminded of the story about the number of seeds in the pomegranate. They equal the number of good commandments and don't do commandments. And that we're always left with that tension, and that's the prize. The prize is living with the tension of what's in the pomegranate. And likewise, I know if you try to get the seeds out of the pomegranate, you have to do it underwater. And that reminded me that, well, there's an unconscious here. And I agree that these are not physicians. These are not priests, are not going to try to cure this, but they're dealing with psychogenic issues. And because the word saria brought to my mind surus. And surus are seeds that germinate inside you and give you the itchy skin. This is where eczema comes from, non-contact dermatitis, where all the psychogenic, psychological, or one might say spiritual issues and conflicts move into the body. And I think that's what this is looking at. And the other thing, this last thing, you mentioned early on that something's new about going on in Leviticus. This is now, they've just been born into freedom and don't know what to do. And there's an old theory which has been debunked, the idea that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And here we are 3,500 years later, still analyzing, still growing in wisdom, still passing wisdom on, or gaining it, or not, falling off the rails. But human life continues to explore, not just in science, but in spirituality. And so that's why I think that each week, when we do more interpretation and our rabbi gets more insights and more recognition is so healthy for the spirit of the planet and for all of us. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much,
Aw.
Richard. Thank you. Beautiful. Let me call on Mark and then Sherry and Steve. So go ahead, Mark.
So as we were discussing Tazria, kept on thinking there are so many Hebrew words that sound like Zerah, and I took out this is my old Alkali Hebrew English dictionary that I got when I was a student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Very helpful. But now I'm starting to see some more connections that are related to the painting as well, because right before the discussion of in the book about discharges is the word zahav, gold. It immediately precedes it. And now I keep on going through this and I'm seeing Eretz Zavat Chalav Dvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. Zavat. Keep on going. The next word in the dictionary is zov, flow, discharge, flux, secretion. So I'm saying that the language, just like the painting, is just so rich with different meaning, and it's all kind of related. I just think it's fascinating.
Wow, okay, this is great. Thank you so much, Mark. That was a great bit of flow. Let me invite Steve and Sherry, then Anna have something she'd like to share.
Yeah, I have two little questions. One, were there other civilizations in parallel with this that were sort of evolving and thinking along the same line? Or is the Hebrew civilization unique in that regard?
Well, I'm not a teacher of multiple civilizations, so I wouldn't be honest for me to answer that. All I know is I'm drawing out of the richness of what the Jewish tradition is offering, and perhaps how it's differentiating itself from its immediate neighbors. But did you have something in particular that you wanted to know in terms of how it might be different? Do you mean in terms of dealing with gold in particular, or what did you have?
Well, gold, yeah, gold in particular was very, you couldn't get rid of it, really. The only thing the chemists found out was aqua regia, concentrated hydrochloric acid, nitric acid was the only thing that would dissolve it. That's why it was so important. It would last forever.
Well, that's fascinating. I hadn't known that. So thank you very much for bringing that to my knowledge. That's interesting. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
And Chair or Steve, did you have anything further you wanted to?
Well, in terms of the other civilizations,
yeah.
I recently read in National Geographic about the civilizations that found in South America. I think it was in Peru. It wasn't Inca, but there were others too. And the archaeologists are still trying to understand why they appeared. They had tremendous astronomical knowledge. They lined up sort of like Stonehenge, huge rocks in certain directions. They could tell the time and the positions when the solstice were, but then they disappeared. So if these other civilizations were so advanced, that's why I'm thinking that they may have produced documents similar.
Thank you.
Or are we unique in that regard?
Thank you. I hadn't thought about all those issues. Thank you so much for introducing them. Let me invite Anna, did you want to share something? Yeah.
This is not a very big thing to share, but it does occur to me that when you're talking about Zeraim, Zaria, fruitfulness, flows of things, gold, gold comes in veins in the earth, blood flows in veins of the body. And the fact that all of this that we've talked about today has not been hidden for all these years, it's been here for any group of people who want to sit down and look at it from, various different perspectives. I just think it's really, really wonderful. What's like Richard Kramer said, what's inside of you causes things on the outside of you, mold on a wall or black in a basement or whatever. It doesn't come from the outside onto the wall. It's something that's in there that comes out. And the fact that things can keep moving and that we can sometimes see what that movement is, it's not pleasant if you have a skin eruption. I'm not saying that, but it's really awesome to think that all life is moving. You know, the gold in the ground, the veins have moved. Our thoughts move in the study. We're always giving forth to something, and we're all just ever so intimately connected on an even smaller than cellular basis. We're all connected.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is very.
All my
brief.
friends.
Thank you. And so let me ask, Wendy, did you have an additional comment?
Just really quick. That was beautiful, by the way. But
Excuse
Robert
me.
and Richard, I'll go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing, and I'll be really quiet, I promise. At the bottom, those three fruits that are not, can't possibly be pomegranates in the lower left corner. They could be apples, they might be a pear, and there might be an apricot. Apricots in the Bible were called apples of gold, by the way.
Apples of gold. Thank you.
They looked like fruit. I was just thinking about what Richard and Robert both brought out about the medicine. Gold actually is a very powerful medicine that is used when they can't find anything else. Probably all of you are doctors and know this already, for treating rheumatoid arthritis. So I was thinking of in Anna's vein that, and what I think it's Richard said, that people were all of a sudden they were birthed into this new freedom. They have this new freedom. Where do they turn? And I'm thinking, now, Rabbi, that you've just brought something new from Leviticus to me, thinking of it as a hug, because it's the divine presence teaching us what to do with what we have, like with the gold. Be careful not to let it shine so brightly that you cannot see the blue in the ephod and all of the design, and take your eyes off of the holiness. So
Beautiful.
was nice. Yeah.
Beautiful, Wendy. So I want to kind of wrap this all together.
Yes, you did the Hebrew. I'm going to go divine.
Okay.
The divine.
Okay.
Okay. There we
So
go.
I want to kind of wrap this all together by saying, for me, this has been a very golden moment that you have all brought forth great seeds of generativity and creativity that inspire me to want to continue to have us grow together in richness and true spiritual as well as physical abundance. So thank you all very much for this golden moment. I wish you well. God bless you all. Look forward to our next gathering. Be well.